Good. So I'm here today to present the goal-driving reasons framework, which is a new model to measure the why of people's goal pursuits, so why people pursue their most important goals in life. And I'd like to present some data why this model is a strong predictor of people's subjective well-being or their happiness. I just can't flick forward now. Okay, so starting off, the reasons why we pursue our most important goals in life has conclusively shown to be an important predictor of people's subjective well-being or their happiness. So it really is important to analyze the differences in people's reasons why they do certain things or why they strive for their most important goals. If you look into the literature, and even within this conference, most people who looked into the reasons why people strive for their goals, I would say nearly predominantly have used the self-concordant theory by Sheldon and Elliott, which is obviously the most renowned theory on the planet, so to speak. Yeah. This one, the theory distinguishes between autonomous and controlled reasons, with autonomous reason being self-initiated, out of self-choices, and the locus of causality is within the person, whereas controlled reasons are where the locus of causality is outside the person and not derived by self-choices. As undoubtedly, this is a very influential theory, and this dimension of autonomy and control is really, really important. I think you can question if it's the only relevant dimension to use to understand why people strive for their most important goals. It probably is quite unlikely that it's the only relevant dimension. So if we would find more relevant dimensions why people strive for their goals, we might be able to predict better people's happiness based on their goal reasons. And this is where the goal-driving reasons framework comes in, because it measures people's reasons for goal pursuit, but it does not draw on the autonomy control dimension at all. Instead of, it applies the approach avoidance dimension. Again, a very important dimension or concept within motivational psychology, very influential. So essentially the goal-driving reasons framework then asked, well, is the goal why people strive for it's the reason why people strive for their goal based on an approach reason? Do they strive towards something positive? Or is the reason why they strive for their most important goals predominantly avoidance driven? Do they move away from something negative? There's a further slight twist within the goal-driving reasons framework as I differentiate, or the model differentiates within person reasons and person environment reasons within it. Essentially, it asks, are the consequences for my actions or for the reasons why I strive for this goal based about or more about consequences for myself, or are the reasons why I strive for this goal more about consequences for my external situation? A bit like we just heard in the presentation before us. And the reason for that is that we know, well, we can increase our own happiness by changing the situation for ourselves or the situation around us, our external situation. So by adapting this 2x2 matrix based on the approach avoidance dimension and person environment within person dimension, or this dichotomy, I can come up with a 2x2 matrix, which then I can show, or I developed 4 specific reasons, each of which filling one of these 4 quadrants. For example, if the goal striving, or if the reason for my goal pursuit is approaching and it's aimed at consequences for myself, then I might pursue a certain goals because I get a lot of pleasure or enjoyment out of it. Yeah, and that is the most, or one of the most important reasons falling into this kind of category here. If it's approaching, if the reason for striving for a goal is approaching, but more towards the external situation, then I'm doing things because it helps others. It makes the world a better place. It's altruistic in a sense. If one of my goals, or if a goal-driving reason is avoidance driven, but more or less about consequences for myself, then I'm doing things to not feel bad about myself in case I would fail with my goal. So I'm really, it's sort of afraid to fail in that goal, because failing in this goal would really mean I would lose self-esteem. I would feel bad about myself. And by all means, I try to avoid this as much as I can. And again, there's a substantial amount of literature behind that, backing up why this is such an important reason. And finally, sometimes we have to do things out of necessity. Yeah? I need to avoid a negative external situation. For example, I need to make sure that I earn enough money. And sometimes we strive for our goals because we just need the money to make a decent living or have enough money to make a living. So that's the goal-driving reasons framework in its concept. And I've sort of been going through really quickly here. which has then been translated into the Goals Driving Reasons questionnaire, which is essentially the same thing that the self-concordance theory does. It asks people, please state your most important goal, and then people have to rate why they strive for this goal. Then the same thing, can you please state your second most important goal, your third most important goal? It's a bit up to the individual research question or research question, how many goals you want to use. And then it asks people to rate, I actually enjoy working on this goal quite a lot. That will be one item for pleasure. It helps others. I strive for this goal because it helps others. That would be altruism. If I fail, others would look down on me. That's why I'm working on this goal, or one. And it is necessary to earn a living. There is now a short form available on that Goals Driving Reasons questionnaire, which measures goals driving reasons for each goal with 8 items. So if you would run it across 3 goals, the 3 most important goals of people, you would have a questionnaire with 24 items. And it's also possible to generate an overall index where I sort of aggregate the strengths of people's pleasure and altruism strivings and subtract from that their self-esteem and necessity striving, which gives me the Goals Driving Reason index. And then empirically now, I could show in a variety of studies with a variety of different samples that this Goals Driving Reason index is significantly correlated with people's affective and cognitive well-being. In one study, I could also show that it's related to people's work engagement and burnout, ranging from 26 to 0.54, which is quite high. So in that sense, a strong correlation. But as I started arguing at the very beginning, it's sort of the ultimate question is, how much does it add to the prediction of happiness or subjective well-being above and beyond self-concordant theory or the self-concordant index? And to this end, we conducted a few multiple hierarchical regressions where in model 1 or step 1, we controlled for age and gender. And then in step 2, we added self-concordance index or the self-concordance index among other variables, but the self-concordance index was the only one who was a significant predictor, as we would have expected. But then interestingly, in step 3, we now added the Goals Driving Reason index on top of that. And what we found consistently in that study, and we could replicate that in another study with work engagement and burnout, that the Goals Driving Reason index seems to be the stronger predictor, or remains the only significant predictor in this scenario, and renders the self-concordant index as non-significant. So in that sense, it seems to be that it's adding something to Goals Driving Reason index, but in a way, it's adding something that it also takes a bit, overlaps too much with the self-concordant index. So there is a bit of overlap. That why we think there's, well, only one can really be significant. In our case, it was mostly the Goals Driving, or it was exclusively the Goals Driving Reason index, you have to say. So how can we explain that theoretically now? What is the difference between the self-concordance index and the Goals Driving Reason index that could explain that? And we believe it has to do with the different theoretical orientation, that the self-concordant theory uses, as I said, the autonomy control dimension, whereas the Goals Driving Reason index uses the approach avoidance dimension. And if you think about this again, autonomous motivation within self-concordant theory is described as the positive form of motivation, where my motivation is derived from self-choices, internal locus of causality. Any externally driven or extrinsic motivation is seen as controlled and a negative form of motivation in that sense. Whereas when you look at approach motivation is also the positive form within the approach avoidance dimension, but it can be autonomous. So you can strive for a goal reason out of approach reasons, which are perfectly autonomous, but you can also strive for approach reason for more or less controlled reasons. In other words, for external rewards, like rewards, praise from others, encouragement from others, etc. And I brought this quote with me from DC and Ryan themselves, who said, behavior that is oriented towards attaining rewards is in many cases clearly approach-oriented, and yet is typically accompanied by an external locus of causality and therefore not autonomous. So here for us is really the theoretical difference that could explain why the Goals Driving Reason index might be having a stronger predictive validity compared to the self-concordant index, because the Goals Driving Reason index allows for the integration of external rewards and is therefore more sensitive to those external influences, which includes the influence of others. And we tested that even further when we looked at what is the difference between the goals-driven reason index and the self-concordant index when we correlate them with measures where people have to negotiate or manage the influence from others in a certain way. And we looked at assertiveness, where, for example, I have to make sure that the way I pursue my goals, I can assert themselves and not sort of let others influence me too much, so I'm more fulfilling their wishes than my goals in that sense. And also we use susceptibility control and sociotropy, which are both measures from the opposite side, how much do people accommodate the wishes of others or the demands of others. So it's a negative form of how we're dealing with the influence of others. And again, in 2 separate studies, we could show that the goals-driven reason index is significantly higher, or even the only one who is significantly correlated with those measures, whereas the self-concordance index is not or significantly lower. So there seems to be some support for our hypothesis or for our argument that the goals-driven reason index is a bit more sensitive to the influence of others, where the self-concordance index, obviously, given its nature, is very much focused on internal motivation or autonomous motivation. And that, to us, seems to be the difference. So what's the implication of that? Well, if we would adopt or agree with the idea that the goals-driven reasons framework is more sensitive to the influence of others, then it would be particularly useful in domains where people have to deal with others and where the influence of others is very strong or rather strong. For example, in the workplace, where people have to pursue certain goals, which in most cases are not self-assigned goals, but assigned goals, where I have a manager which I have to please in a certain way, where I have certain constraints. There, for example, it could well be that the goals-driven reasons framework or the goals-driven reason index seems to be a more suitable one. And in the same way, if people have to work in a strongly customer-driven environment, again, where they have to negotiate their own goals and the reasons why, their own motivation, accordingly with the demands of customers, and find common ground there. Okay, so to conclude, the goals-driven reason framework offers a different way of conceptualizing the quality of goal striving or of goal reasons, why people strive for their most important goals. It's a significant predictor of subjective well-being, and it seems at times to be even more powerful than the self-concordant theory, at least in the studies we've done. The reason for that seems to be that it's more sensitive to the influence of others, which makes it particularly important in the work context. Hence, therefore, I would like to encourage other researchers to give it a try and see if that really increases their predictability of people's happiness once they use the goals-driven reason index. And especially after now 2020, where the short form of the goals-driven reasons framework or the goals-driven reasons questionnaire is now available. Before that, we had a few other studies where we had the long form, which is 17 items per goals-driven reason. Obviously, if you run that across 3 goals, you have 51 items, which makes it then quite cumbersome. But with the new version, I think that really could be an interesting for researchers to try out. And that is me done. Thank you very much. And I took the liberty to put the reference for the short form down at the bottom in case you're interested. Thank you very much.